Well, Ian Brady was jailed for life in 1966 for the murder of 12-year-old John Kilbride, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey and 17-year-old Edward Evans. Brady and his accomplice Myra Hindley lured 5 victims and sexually tormented them before killing them and burying their bodies on Saddleworth Moor between July 1963 and October 1965. The body of one victim, 12-year-old Keith Bennett, has never been found. Hindley died in 2002, but Brady has been held at Ashworth Hospital since 1985 because he is mentally ill. Since 1999, he's refused all food and has been force-fed via a tube from his nose to his stomach. Next week, if the Mental Health Tribunal decides he is now mentally competent, Brady will be eligible to return to the main prison system where hunger strikers have been allowed to die in the past. Should Ian Brady be allowed to starve himself to death? Well, David Cohen, Keith Bennett, his mum Winnie Johnson, she died last year. I mean, you represented her, and I remember interviewing Winnie, met her over the years, extraordinary woman, a lovely, lovely person. And with such sadness, obviously, such tragedy. I remember interviewing her then, and it must be 1988, and she was going to write to Brady, and she was going to write to Hindley. She was looking for answers. None have come from Brady, and none ever will they? It's part of his control, isn't it?
Yes, he is a control freak. It was very interesting that in 2006 I went on television publicly and appealed on behalf of Winnie Johnson. I was a solicitor at the time, for Brady, in fact, to meet with me. And I went along to Ashworth, and I met him on 2 occasions with my wife, and I played the role of a hostage negotiator. Now, many of you may criticise me for, in fact, negotiating with somebody who committed some of the most heinous crimes in the 20th century. But this was truly a hostage situation. And it's so sad that before Winnie died, she didn't have that closure of being able to give a Christian burial to her son,
She was buried with Keith's glasses, wasn't
yes,
she?
Yes, that's so sad. So I think I was justified, in fact, in negotiating with him. I had the blessing of the Greater Manchester Police and also the Home Office. Yeah. I had 2 meetings with him, but unfortunately it didn't work out. And I think when it didn't work out, he lost his last opportunity to have that one human right, that is to dictate how he should die.
It's a power thing with him, is it? I mean,
oh, yes. I've sat in the same room with him, and it's deeply disturbing. He sits at right angles to you, wearing his signature coat, and it's a monologue and a rant. But he's extremely aware of his situation, and he's an ace bargainer, and this is the only chip he's got. It's a macabre game of chess, and this is the pawn he keeps pushing forward.
Yes, it's a very good way of putting it.
I'm convinced, in fact, in 2006, that he knew where the body was, and that he still does.
Yes. He still does, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Caroline Farrow, from your Christian perspective, from Catholic Voices, if he is shown to be sane, why should he be force-fed?
I think, and just listening to that testimony, I feel quite sick, actually. What Brady did was unspeakable.
Well, why should he be force-fed?
But the thing is...
That's essentially the question for you.
The thing is, if we remove the food from him, then the state is sanctioning suicide effectively, and the state is not in a position or shouldn't sanction suicide. I think that's a very slippery state.
But that is the situation now for prisoners in the system. They can refuse food. Secondly,
I think if we allow Brady to die, this isn't about punishment or about revenge, but where there's life, there is always hope. And although this is going to sound fairly incredible to many viewers, I think we have to remember that there is always, the Christian message, there's always hope, there's always redemption, there is always salvation. And I think as long as Brady is alive, he has the chance to repent and come to some sort of reconciliation.
He's had ample opportunity.
He has had ample.
You seriously think there is hope of redemption?
There's hope for everyone. There is hope for everyone. That's the joy of the Christian message.
Cole Moore.
Well, I think that's powerful and debatable, but I also think it's irrelevant. The question is this man, regardless of whether he's Ian Brady or not, sane? If he is sane, he goes into the prison system and he must be treated. It's absolutely imperative that he must be treated like all other prisoners, which means, as things stand, as I understand it, that he would have the right to refuse food. If he's not sane, he needs to stay where he is. For me, although everything I've heard so far is very powerful, it's also not the point.
Not the point, James?
I disagree, because what you've got is a clash between the practical and the theoretical, and when you're having a conversation about what should or shouldn't be done to somebody, you should be entitled to say, well, I think all prisoners should be force-fed. No prisoners should be allowed to starve themselves, which is my view. And I think the simplest way of putting it is by saying that we as a society hold human life in a much higher regard than Ian Brady ever did. And as a direct result of that, we don't take it away. And also, I think it's fascinating how two people arguing on the same side can be sounding a little callous and a little clement. It shows how grey this issue is. But what isn't grey is that justice in this country is not served by handing a multiple-choice tick box along with a sentence when you hand it down. You don't get to choose your punishment when you've been convicted of murder, any more than you get to choose how many years you spend in prison. Kevin, he doesn't have the right.
Kevin, do you believe he should have afforded the human right of being able to, on what grounds? On compassion to Ian Brady?
Absolutely not on compassion, just purely on the human rights. I think there's many more than 50 Shades of Grey involved in this, and of course this question invites us to become binary in our thinking. Should he be allowed to die? Should he not be allowed to die? And the actual phrase in the question, should he be allowed to commit suicide? The question is, does he have rights over his own body? We don't in the UK have a justice system that says, I sentence you to prison and we own your body. We don't have that system in the UK. And so we don't say to all prisoners, when we've got your body, we're going to force feed you. When we had Myra Hindley, who died from heart complications following a chest infection, we didn't say, we're going to wire you up and keep you alive and keep your vital systems going ad infinitum,
so
because we can.
If a young prisoner on remand hangs himself and a prison guard comes into the cell and he's still alive, they should leave him there.
No, absolutely not. I think we should do everything I don't think we should promote...
It's his body.
So I don't think we should promote suicide. I don't think we should do anything to promote, support, enable suicide. And I think we should do everything we can to prevent it.
So it should be by a mission.
But, exactly, but I don't think that you can say 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, we're going to have so much control over you, we're going to prevent you. What we've actually done, paradoxically, to Brady, what some people don't understand is, for a child murderer, what we've actually done is we've infantilised him. We've turned him into an infant in which we force-feed him, he gets mashed food through a tube, he has no control over what he does.
Which is why it's important not to single him out as being deserving of special treatment, but we should prevent suicides in prison.
We should try and prevent it.
A national scandal. Why on earth would you argue to add to the number?
I completely agree with you. We should try,
one second.
We should try and prevent it.
Paul Bowen, you've met him in your professional... course your professional duties along the way. What should he have the right not, to effectively commit suicide?
You don't have to agree with what he has done in order to acknowledge the fact that he should be treated in the same way as other people with human rights.
You understand why a lot of people have a huge problem with
of course I do.
extending compassion to Ian Brady.
But the trouble with that is that once you start making judgments about which rights people get to keep, and whether they should keep rights dependent on what they've done, you end up with Abu Ghraib and you end up with Guantanamo Bay. We have to take a very, very strong line. If you force-feed somebody in circumstances where there is no medical necessity for doing so, you are torturing them. That is what the European Court of Human Rights has held. Now, if you've ever seen somebody force-fed, you would understand why that is.
Well, that's not quite true, because if you know anything about Ashworth, Brady sometimes feeds himself.
Well, then he's not being force-fed on those occasions, is he?
Force-fed. But isn't there something important that we're missing here? Why are we arguing about Brady's human rights? What about the rights of the victims? All the people he tortured and raped and murdered. What about the families now, the living families, who have this dreadful thing hanging over them for the rest of their lives? What about their rights?
I think that's fundamental.
Leslie Ann Downey's stepfather, Leslie Ann, of course, lost her life as well to Brady and Hindley, and she was one of his victims. Her stepfather, Alan West, is saying for God's sake, let him die so we can get out of this and have closure, and he's no longer there for us to think about. Do you respect that?
That's a very good point, but Winnie Johnson didn't get closure, did she? So why should Brady have closure then, without in fact revealing where the body of Keith Bennett is?
It's fundamentally wrong to argue that Brady was inhumane in the way he behaved, which he was, therefore we will be inhumane to him. That's not the way we work in a civilised society. It's not what we do.
Do you know what it is, James? And audience, in a minute, you know, some people are of the opinion that, you know, if he wants to die, we shouldn't let him.
Yes, well, this is the
It's because it's the thing that
what
he
I mean
wants.
by the tension between callousness and clemency. It can sound like vengeance, but I think rights are supposed to be absolutes, and there is an absolute that supersedes all rights, and that should be, whether you're religious and you call it sanctity, or whether you're simply humane and you call it the sort of overreaching importance of human life. To help somebody take it away is against many laws in this country.
Rabbi,
There is
sorry,
an
The Article 2 put the...
Sorry,
There is
Paul,
an
let me get to the Rabbi.
outstanding issue. You went and tried to get this deal, and we still don't know where Keith Bennett's remains are. He still holds that. Now, in the same way as you believe that he, you know, until the day of his death, he could repent, till the day of his death, he could tell us where those remains are. And that family, sadly his mother's no longer alive, but that family would mean a lot to that family. And I think another attempt should be made to ask him, and maybe even a deal. You know, you can die, but you let us have that information.
Surely.
Well, do you
I think
think
morally, then, that's justified in trading with such a fiend, in fact, to give him that right. But I still think it's very, very important to respect the rights of the victims. And another thing, too, if we give him this right to take his own life, isn't that reversing a sentence of the courts? He received, in 1966, at the hands of Mr. Justice Fenton Atkinson, 3 concurrent life sentences, and I underline the word life. So he should serve those sentences. We're not depriving him of his life. He should serve them.
Paul?
Once he dies, he served his life sentence, however he dies.
Yes.
But I'll ask you a question. Would you therefore think it's justifiable to torture him in order for him to be forced to disclose the information that he is keeping from Winnie Johnson?
I don't think anybody here in this room would say that that was justified.
Well, then, if he can't be tortured in order to disclose this information, what is the state supposed to do?
Well, you have to earn human rights, in my view. They're not granted to you automatically. And by revealing...
Jodie, I want to hear from the audience. Well, put your hand up if you want to say something. Reverend Jodie.
Well, I think you have human rights by warrant of being a human being, actually, and I find myself agreeing with Cole in that actually some of this debate is irrelevant. If the law says that he can go, and then
So which is the compassionate thing to do, to abide by that human,
well, I think what we're talking
or...
about different understandings of justice, and within
And
the
of compassion.
wider... Well, within the wider understanding of justice, we have compassion, and who's that compassion for? It's actually for both the victim and the perpetrator. And I do think, actually, here we're talking a bit more about retributive justice, so that idea that because these crimes were so heinous, we really want that person to suffer.
But the law
but actually...
doesn't believe human rights are absolute, though. I mean, if you're a human and you deserve, and all humans deserve freedom, then how can you put a prisoner in jail because you're depriving them of their freedom? They haven't ceased being human, though, but because of their actions, they no longer deserve that right to freedom. So human rights have never been absolute in the Western law system.
But I think we're getting into a very difficult situation here if actually what we're saying is that the level of the crime will somehow give us the right to force another level of cruelty in terms of the punitive justice that comes from that. And actually I think that becomes toxic for a nation or for the victims to become part of that. So we may think that's going to make us feel better, but actually it's not.
Let me go to the audience if I would. Young man there. Hold on a second,
the
James.
idea of earning human rights is an oxymoron. They're rights because we all deserve them. And if the state starts deciding who can have them and who can't, then that negates the point.
Right beside you. Hi, sir.
I'm confused. Why do you assume even if this man does have human rights, why is a human right to die? That is never been decided. If you say that rights are given by God, then God doesn't allow you to die. If you say they're chosen by society, why should society allow people to die? So why does anyone have the right to die?
He has the right not to eat, Caroline, doesn't he?
Yeah, but nobody... The thing is, we've all had
so you would carry on the force feeding?
We all have a right to life, but nobody has a right to die. And this is what this feeds into. This is feeding into a whole euthanasia issue. People seem to be arguing that Brady has a right to die at the time and place of his choosing because it's a human right. That is not a basic human right and should never be.
One of the sad facts...
Suicide's not against the law.
One of the sad facts of the human condition is that death is inevitable. We don't have a right to die, we have an inevitability of death. So this question is, do we have a right to choose when and where we die? I have an uncle at the moment who's dying. He's in his early 80s and he has cancer, inoperable cancer, and he's taken the choice not to have any treatment. He's taken the choice to have no chemotherapy, no radiotherapy, and he says, I'm going to die somehow, now I know how I'm going to die, so I feel more in control. And there's nobody on his case saying, Michael, you mustn't die, you must let us force treat you, you must let us operate on you and treat you whatever way. He's allowed to make their choice.
But that's the thing is, though, there's a very different... What your uncle is doing is allowing nature to take its course. Okay, he's refusing treatment. I think what we're talking about here...
Brady wants to refuse food.
But food is not actually treatment. We need food and drink to keep us alive. I think what we're talking about here is this very much a right to die, and nobody has a right to die. And if we start introducing it, a right to die becomes a duty to die, and we need to be very, very, very careful.
We have a right to choose what is done with our bodies. So we have a right, if we are suffering from a terminal illness, to say, I don't want any more treatment. But we also have a right to say, I don't want you to pin me down and to force me to have food and water, if that is a choice that I make. If I'm competent to make that choice, if I'm mentally competent. Now, that's the very issue that's being decided in Ian Brady's case. But if he is mentally competent, then he should have the same right.
There's so many behaviours in prison where you actually do surrender the right to your own body. You will be pinned down. You will be physically restrained. They lock the doors, by the way. That is a denial of freedom, a denial of choice, and it is a denial of bodily liberty. By locking the doors, they're telling you what you can and can't do with your body. Your uncle, for whom I offer nothing but sympathy, has several freedoms that Brady doesn't have. And the reason why Brady doesn't have them is because he is a convicted murderer. We pay prison guards to go into these prisons to keep people alive and keep them safe, not to watch them starve themselves to death in the manner of a concentration camp victim. We run the risk here of turning ourselves into executioners.
His very sentence is exactly what you said. His sentence was to have the doors locked and the keys thrown away. That is the sentence. There wasn't a bigger sentence as we're going to do that, and we're going to put you...
I'm afraid there was. If he tried to hang himself, we would cut him down. If he tried to jump out of a window, we would try and catch him.
Gentlemen here, there is it's costing £300,000 a year to keep him in Ashworth Prison as well, which is a consideration which some of the newspapers have brought up. Kevin, you would say that's utterly irrelevant, and many would, but...
Yes,
some would.
It's absolutely irrelevant. The
Irrelevant,
imperative of government today is to save money. There are moral principles here, and they're far more important than saving money.
Yeah, you, sir.
Cutting in between the moral and ethical normative processes here of both sides, should we also look at Brady himself, and is he not manipulating everyone?
The trouble is, he is, but the trouble is we've now got 60 million psychiatrists in England who've all got a view on Brady's mental illness. This actually opens up a whole spectrum we haven't got time to go into today.
There's a whole spectrum about if he is mentally ill, if he does have... Does a personality disorder constitute mental illness?
And what
psychopathy, is that mental illness?
Exactly right. And what rights do people who have a mental illness have about their own body?
Go on, David.
That when I emerged from Ashworth after a very harrowing experience on 2 occasions with my wife, the first thing we said to each other when we got outside the walls was, well, what do you think? And we said that he's completely rational, he's lucid, he may have been ranting at us, but he's not insane, he's just a cold-blooded murderer. And that was our viewpoint.
Not insane.
Not insane at all.
Fundamentally, because there are some very high-functioning, very able people in society who have very severe mental illnesses, and you and I would meet them. I'm a psychotherapist, and I meet them on my daily work.
John Ronson wrote a very good book about this recently.
Absolutely, and we would meet them, and we wouldn't go, oh my gosh, that person's barking mad. Look, it's very obvious. They're rational, but they have a mental illness. There's another issue I want to make. When I was a boy growing up in Liverpool, this shows my age a bit now, growing up in Liverpool, the year that Elvis Presley was at the top of the charts with Wooden Heart, there were over 100 people in the UK were taken to court and charged with the crime of attempting to commit suicide. So that was in the early 60s. Only 1961 that was decriminalised. So within the current generation, we're moving away slightly from our attitudes about the criminalisation of suicide, and our attitudes to the right to live, and the right to life and everything else, and the right to death are changing. So we're on the cusp of that. Brady, as more than 50 Shades of Grey, has challenged us right into that area of what's our view on life, what's our view on death, what's our view on morality. He's taken us right into that area, and that's what clever, manipulative criminals do sometimes. They take you into that dark area.
Thank you all very much indeed for taking part in that debate. Thank you. Got 21,000 people to Stonehenge to watch the dawn. They weren't all New Age travellers, ageing hippies or latter-day druids. There were many Christians there too, people from other mainstream faiths seeking something spiritual amidst the crystals and the tarot cards. Is it right to pick and mix religion? Rabbi Eli, to an extent, having thought about this, I mean, religions pick and mix religion, don't they? Because there's lots of the, there's lots of the Bible and the Quran, there's lots of the Torah in the Bible, and who knows what other, pre-Christian, pre-Jewish myths were involved as well.
I think unless people are living in closed authoritarian communities, they are free to choose. We live in a modern world. Individuals have the power of choice, and they are making choices. And even within a religion, not everybody does everything. They choose the things that are meaningful to them. And it's really about meaning and a search for meaning.
Edit out the stuff you don't like as well.
Absolutely, but it's about a search for meaning. And in fact, what we should be doing is being actually quite uplifted by the fact that people are on searches and they're interested in exploring different things because they're searching for meaning in their lives. And they may find that there are things within their own traditional community. A Jew might find a lot of things in their own traditional community, but they may find things that are not. They may find other things that are needed. For example, more contemplation. There are a lot of Jewish Buddhists.
Right.
People are Jewish, but they're also interested in Buddhism. If people are genuinely open and interested in spiritual matters, why wouldn't they explore other religious paths,
but then you've got
which also hold
those people in North
truth.
London, you've got those Jews for Jesus, and they have nothing but contempt from the Jewish community there.
Well, the issue of Jews for Jesus is slightly different, only because if people believe that Jesus is God, then that obviously is contradictory to the idea that there is only one God.
So it's picking and mixing to an extent.
Well, to an extent, but what I'm talking about is not Jews for Jesus. I'm talking about people who are genuinely trying to find not another place to put themselves in a pigeonhole.
Yeah.
People who are genuinely interested in exploring and finding out what do different Christians believe, what are Muslim beliefs. They want to read the Quran. They want to find out, not just being in a closed position where I'm only going to believe in what I've been told to believe.
Can you be a Christian and believe in reincarnation?
I hope that people will come along to the interfaith session this afternoon that's happening at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Dyke Road.
It's going to be busy now.
Jane Hindu speaker and myself, and also a Quaker speaker talking about
getting towards truth. Caroline Farrow. I mean, people would argue God goes way beyond religion, and religion is kind of humankind's cack-handed efforts to fathom the unfathomable. But I mean, the Catholic Church is interesting, actually, as a way of picking and mixing, because, contraception, intrinsically evil, according to popes, and yet, according to one survey, 69% of Catholics use contraception. That's picking and mixing, isn't it?
I think when we're talking...
Yes.
No, think about it there, OK. The reason why pick and mix, it's called syncretism, picking and mixing different elements. What is religion? It's not about us. It's about a search for meaning of life and God and truth. And why we can't pick and mix religion if we have a genuine faith is because we have a search for the truth. And therefore, I think there's going to always be... I'll come to a point where there's intellectual conflict, because if as a Christian we believe Jesus was the Son of God, it's a revealed religion, we believe this is the truth, then why are we suddenly going to believe actually there's Buddha and bits of Islam and bits of Hinduism? It makes no coherent sense.
The church over the years, there have been so many apology to Galileo, Copernicus was reburied in African slave trade. They didn't actually apologise to Darwin, but they said,
But this
right.
is not. This is not.
But Protestants burn, you know, women's
But
rights.
Nikki, what we're getting at here is the Catholic Church, along with other churches, has in the past not always behaved quite as it should have done. But fundamentally, the Trinitarian belief of God the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit is basic, has never ever changed, and it's a search for truth.
That's non-negotiable.
But this is a fundamental issue, isn't it? This is a fundamental issue. There are actually not one truth, there are many truths. There's not just one way to God. There are many ways to God. So if I am actually going to respect you as a Christian, if I'm going to respect a Muslim, if I'm going to respect a pagan, if I'm going to respect other people, I have to respect that they've also got their truths. And so that your approach is one which denies the truth of other faiths and of other beliefs.
There can only be one truth.
There can only be one truth.
As in, we can have universal ethical truths, but Nikki, are you wearing, I don't know, a black suit or a red suit? You know, which is true?
But who is
Something is either true or
I could list right now about 200 Christian institutions across the world who believe that their truth is the truth.
Yes.
Among those would be the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church's idea of truth has evolved considerably over the years, particularly between the years 300 and 400 AD. Now, if I might make Nikki think about where we are right now this morning, there's about 900,000 people in Catholic churches, there's about 900,000 people in Anglican churches. There's about another 2 million people in other kinds of churches across the country on a Sunday, on a regular Sunday. There's also, if you look at all the surveys, drag out my favourite statistic, if you ask people if they believe in God or any kind of higher power, and you strip out all of the ones who go to church, temple or mosque or any affiliation, 26 million people in Britain who say they believe in God but don't belong to an institution. So our question's asked, is it right to pick and mix? The fact is, the majority faith in Britain is pick and mix.
And it's all part of scrabbling our ways in this confusing world towards truth. Sorry, Judy, I must speak to the witch because he's been introduced. Kevin, how are you doing this morning?
Oh, I'm very good, thank you.
Good to see you. Looking absolutely resplendent.
Why don't you shake his hand?
There you go. There you go. Because
he's
dressed up for us. He's put his witchly robes on. Let's explain briefly in a nutshell what you do.
Basically, paganism in the modern age is about looking into oneself. I believe that a god and a goddess we're all part of. We worship the universal forces.
You believe in God, or...?
I don't believe in God as in the concept, because unfortunately, you mentioned the term religion, it means war. And 200 or 300 years ago, I wouldn't be allowed to sit here, I would have been burned at the stake, or hung in England. And there are still people here now, a lady over there, looking very lovely, I may say, who says...
That's nice.
That's not going to get you. No, but she said, but there can only be one.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not here to preach or dictate my belief system. I'm here to say, this is what I believe in, as are other people here. And at the end of the programme, hopefully we're going to all agree to differ, that we can all go home, worship our own deities as such. And I mean, even if your viewers, if they just worship watching EastEnders...
Well, Dave Allen used to say that, if anyone remembers, at the end of his shows. Good night, and may your God go with you.
Yeah.
He used to say... But, Karen, if I may, Stan, there's a very interesting point there. Exodus, suffer not a witch to live. Now, you've essentially pick and mixed that bit out, haven't you?
No,
otherwise,
absolutely not.
No?
Because as a Christian, we believe that Christ is a new covenant.
Right.
So his law supersedes the Old Testament. So we
so
appreciate...
you ignore everything in the Old Testament?
We appreciate... we say that Christ fulfilled the Old Testament. So
why don't you ignore the bits in the Old Testament about homosexuality? If you ignore the bit about witches?
Because it's very clear, Jesus talked very positively about marriage and what marriage is. Jesus was such a radical person. He was so radical. If Jesus wanted... people say, well, Jesus never talked about homosexuality.
Jesus had supernatural powers.
But if Jesus...
Jesus was also Jewish, by the way.
If Christ wanted, and I don't mean this in any sort of pejorative sense, but if Christ, wanted to set out a vision of sort of homosexuality, he would have done so.
What did he say about witches, then?
Why did he not?
Did he absolutely invalidate the witch thing?
Christ came and
Jesus is gay.
and
Possibly.
no, Christ came and he said, love one another. You know, your two main commandments are to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and stemming on from that is to love your neighbour as yourself.
Absolutely.
But what if your neighbour's
a witch? That's right.
If your neighbour's a witch, what do you do?
Let's bring Kevin in, and James, go on.
I think very early on you said something that I think goes to the heart of this. And this is the arrogance of organised religion in saying we have the truth and we're in search of the truth. Critical thinking and rationality says what you want to do is develop your own morality, an appropriate morality for the society within which you live, and you search for that in different places. Pick a mix is great, but religion is bigger than Woolworths. There's 4,200 identified religions in the world today, 4,200, and that's not to mention the cults of Zanu, the intergalactic warrior, and people like that.
I'm coming on to that in a minute.
There's 4,200, and what we've done, organised religion is the history of organised religion is schism. It's split. For a while we're together, then we split, and then we split again.
Because that's
OK, Jody, is it all right to pick and mix a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of a Jewish, Buddhist, a Christian, Hindu?
Well, I think that sort of lacks integrity, actually, and understanding what actually faith is. So I think on the one side,
you can't all be right.
No, and I mean, I would say, why is searching for truth seen as a bad thing? I mean, it doesn't have to be exclusive, so that's different to what you're saying. Yeah. But what I would want to say is that, you know, when you give yourself to a particular faith, you're worshipping a particular God, and practices come out of worshipping that particular God that you worship. And I think sometimes it's pulling those things apart. So we see practices that are inherent, for example, within Christianity or Buddhism, so issues of aspects of justice and peace. And people look at those practices and say, yes, I'd like to shape my life around those are good things, those are things I want to do. And they sort of then paste together that they're this sort of somehow Christian and somehow a Buddhist. But actually, if we look back at what their beliefs are that feed into those practices, those are quite different things which are mutually exclusive. But actually, that's not to say that you can't learn and you can't affirm that in another person.
Whenever people say, I don't mean to be pejorative, or they use phrases like, well, if someone has genuine faith, and it doesn't matter how demurely one sits there, you're being incredibly judgmental and incredibly arrogant. And it's not so much reserving the right to cherry-pick nice bits from other people's religion, it's reserving the right to exercise the intellect that you believe God presumably gave me, and arrive at my own decisions about what I do. So last Sunday was the first Father's Day I've had since my father died, and I went to church. I went to church because I feel closer to him there. I took my children with me. My children were born using fertility techniques that the head of the church I attended considers to be wrong and evil and possibly even satanic. I don't know. I haven't read your book lately. However, I came out of church feeling better. My children came out of church feeling better, and I felt more loving towards my dad than I would have done if I hadn't gone to church. So how dare anybody tell me that I'm somehow less of a Christian or I don't have a genuine faith?
Let me ask you a question, Abdullah. Right, you think the Quran is the word of God? I'd be fascinated to know the answer to this question, so address it. Now, Jodie here feels the power of Jesus. She feels a relationship with God. I'm right in saying that.
Yes.
You really do feel that strongly, don't you? Yeah. You really feel the power as well, don't you, Kevin? And Rabbi Ali, you really feel spiritual, and you feel that. And Caroline, you're a fantastic woman of really strong beliefs and strong faith, and you feel a relationship with Jesus and with God, don't you? Definitely. What are they feeling?
Well, I think there's a difference between truth and sincerity.
What are they?
What experience are they having? A person can sincerely believe on what their belief is the truth. Just because they do that doesn't mean it's necessarily true. It might be, might not be. But truth is external to the human being.
We just heard.
Assuming that we're not nihilists, the truth is external.
What subjective experience are they having?
Well, as I said, that depends on the individual. I don't actually know those individuals. But all I'm saying is that there is a truth, and you can't pick and choose falsehood and truth and mix it together. You believe in something. And I think that in this society, even in this society, firstly, people believe in absolutes. You believe in human rights as an absolute thing. Not everyone might share the liberal definition of human rights. There's other definitions. And also, there are minorities in this society which are told what to believe and what not to believe.
Caroline?
Yeah, the one thing that that hasn't been highlighted here is we're all talking about truth, and you know, I was really moved by what you said about going to church
James,
on Father's Day. I think it's not a question of what we believe, but why. And so when we're talking about critical thinking and rationality, I think there's a sort of automatic assumption that those of us with a very deep faith are somehow brainwashed, or we've lost the power of critical thought or rational thinking. But actually, particularly, you know, with Catholicism, everything is joined up. And I think if there is an area of faith that we particularly have difficulty with, and we know what the flashpoints are in the Catholic Church, for example, we have to ask ourselves, which I did, why? Why does the Catholic Church teach this? Why does Islam teach that? You know, and this is all part of the search for truth, is why. Not just saying, this is challenging, I'm going to ignore it.
Thank you, Caroline. Kevin?
You've got the one thing you don't need in this equation is God. When you look at the great philosophers, the great writers, the great artists, the great scientists, you can pick and mix from all the things. You can pick from Kant, you can pick from Heidegger. You don't need to have a God in there. You can say, is that philosophy a relevant philosophy to me? And when you ask the question, Nikki, about what are people feeling, all these different people with their different truths and their different realities, what I feel is my connectedness to the people in this room. I wish everybody in this room the very best possible life they can possibly have, and I wish that they behave in a way that's appropriate to the people around them. That's what I feel when I...
I'm tempted to bring in Durkin from the British Bookmakers Association. What are the odds here? What's the best bet? Sorry, Cole, you wanted to come back.
Well, only to say this, that we have, again, you know, at least half a dozen different versions of truth around this meeting. But what's happening in the nation out there is that there are all these people who don't belong to any of these particular affiliations, who are making their own way and trying to work out their own understanding of what they consider to be a higher power somewhere out there. That's fine. But what James says puts his finger on it a little bit, because what those people lack, what we lack, is community. We look for community in other ways. James found it when he went to church that day. Other people find it in organisations like the Scouts, the Guides, whatever. But also in their local club, in charities, the way that they subscribe to charities.
Political party?
Political parties, football clubs.
Yeah.
So people are looking for community and improvising an alternative to the community that they once found in their religion, their default religion. Okay, so actually, really, there's no point in the half a dozen people in the marketplace shouting louder and louder to say, I have the certainty, because people are not particularly interested in that. What they want to do is be able to mediate their own experience of God.
Let me come to Stan. Is it OK to pick and mix religion, do you think, Stan?
No, it's not. The problem that certainly what Christians think is that the problem that we have with this is that the person of Jesus. Because we seek to follow Jesus. Jesus came, as the rabbi said, saying that he was God. He was God come among us. Not only that, but he said, I am the way, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me.
So now, will God punish you for picking and mixing?
Well, what Jesus says is that the Bible speaks of humanity in terms of being lost. In terms of when it comes to eternity and life after death, that we can't find our own way there, and that's why Jesus came, to show us the way there. Now, if you're lost,
the way is through Jesus.
If you're lost and someone says, "Let me show you the way," then you follow them. Now, if you decide halfway that you're going to go somewhere else, that's the decision.
You have had the last word. Maybe that was divine intervention. Who knows? Thank you very much for watching this series. We'll be back.